Welcome to another episode of Twice Told Tales podcast. Today we're going to talk to Tim Kirby of the Tim Kirby Russia Reloaded YouTube channel, and he has formerly been working with various news channels, and we have him today to talk about different issues, including what is happening with Russia and how Russia is being perceived in the world. Tim, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me very much. And yes, I've been pretty much all over the Russian media as both a guest and sometimes as someone who works there or does independent projects for others.
So you have moved to live in Russia as an American, yes? Can we start from that and tell us about that experience?
Well, yeah.
How long have you been living there?
The problem is I kind of get asked this question every day, so please forgive me if I'm a little burnt on answering it about why you come to Russia. It's one thing where, unfortunately, Russians, even that the stereotype that Russians are patriotic is a bit of a misnomer. That's changing now as we're speaking, but especially when I came here 15 years ago, that was certainly not the case. So anyways, generally Russian people they tend to be stunned, shocked, appalled, and maybe more than anything, offended that I chose to come here. But I don't know, maybe Chris can relate to this. I don't know about your background, but I am a bum from the inner city, man. I am a nobody from the absolute bottom rung of the American ladder. However, all of my ancestors, despite the way my last name looks, all of my ancestors came from Eastern Europe. So long story short, I wanted to give life, a new try back in the motherland. And it worked out really well. And so that's why I'm here now.
Well, I think a lot of that, like the way American soft power works is what you're seeing reflected in the Russian population, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union or the intentional implosion of the Soviet Union. There, the West created the narrative that, Russians were nothing and worthless, and the West is what you have to look towards for advancement.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about the influence of that kind of stuff, well, you can see if you travel around the former Soviet Union, like the mentality that was bred in Ukraine, the Russophobic mentality there, it is literally just copy and pasted all over every former Soviet republic, and even within some of the republics within Russia, as this sort of generally the overall message is that if it weren't for the Russians, you'd live like kings. If it weren't for the Russians, you'd be as rich as America, and so on and so forth.
But there's some republics that are breaking back. I lived in Kyrgyzstan for a couple of years. I love the Kyrgyz people, and they were being pulled back and forth between the U.S., who had the Manas air base there, and to bomb and to it was basically a refueling base that they were using, and a situating base to
I saw the planes with my own eyes, man. I went there for a vacation one year. One of the very few vacations I've taken as a father. I went to Kyrgyzstan to meet my one American buddy who was living there. We went to a yurt hotel, had a blast. Kyrgyzstan is very nice, very chill.
We'll talk about our connections in Kyrgyzstan off air, but anyway, it's a fantastic country, and it's very unknown by American travelers. And I was traveling in another country, and I met two people from that country. And as I thought, I always like to feel I know about the world, and they told me where they're from, and I was like Kazakhstan. I was like Kurdistan. I was like, what's Kyrgyzstan? Like there was a new letter in the words that I'd never heard before, and I was like, I don't know anything about this country. And I was like, I have to go there because it's like I feel terrible. I don't know about an entire country in the world. And so I worked in the next couple of years to get to travel there after especially hearing from them about it, because it sounded amazing, and it is amazing. It's green, and it's like Switzerland of
Bishkek is an amazingly green capital city. It's probably the greenest capital city I've ever seen, including Moscow, which actually has a fairly large amount of parks. Moscow's not too bad on that, but Bishkek's better.
Yeah. So anyway, what I was going to say is, like, they were pulled between the U.S. and Russia, who were fighting over dominance, especially in the government. And they had two coups that were basically U.S.-sponsored coups to try and kind of destabilize the government, because they kept shifting towards Russia. They did pass a law where you have to do all the governing in Kyrgyz, but that kind of failed because they still worked in Russian. So, like, I don't know if they pushed that further and they only do it in Kyrgyz now. But I mean, Russia was Kyrgyz people do have their language in there, but there were a lot of Russians that lived there who also spoke Kyrgyz. It was kind of absurd. And the Russian language also allowed them to participate with their neighbors so I think that's very important as a small state. And the U.S. was in there, and the Canadians were in there putting up gold mines because that's one of the main resources there. So there was this huge geopolitical battle. But I was super happy yesterday to see that that the government took a marked shift towards Russia. So I think it's not as clear as all the states being Ukrainized or Taiwanese-ized or whatever prepositioned.
I mean to say that one of the I'm not. The thing is, I can't really comment on Taiwan, but I mean to say that really that technique, it has kind of worked, but Ukraine is a little bit different, and that's why it worked there to the extent that it did. Whereas with the others, there's always this sort of attempt to oppress the Russian language. Say if it weren't for the Russians, they'd be richer. To basically kind of put the blame on Russia and really hype up the history of Russia as being the first half of the Soviet Union, because the Russian Revolution and the counter-revolution that followed are really the periods in Russian history that people who are both Russian and non-Russian, where they get their gripes from. Because if you talk about would someone in Chechnya or someone in Tiva or Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan or wherever, what would they might be salty about? It all comes from that particular small window of 1,000 years of Russian history. And of course, our friends at the State Department really like to focus on that time period because it serves their interests.
I think what you just said is the key. It's basically it's the cornerstone of the CIA in geopolitics. Is they go to countries and they just find what their core anger is, what their core dispute is, and then they just foster that so that then they can be like their ally in the thing that they're not being supported on in their current political power structure. So then the U.S. can keep that in their back pocket all around the world. In all the different countries, they have these groups that are pissed off at the main power, and they just use them occasionally. And then sometimes they're like, okay, in 5-10 years, we want to have a larger conflict here. And then they engage in propaganda exercises where you promote removing of languages, and like they did in the Ukraine where you weren't allowed to speak Russian anymore. And that was, those are kind of very obvious steps towards conflict. And I having Ukrainian friends, I'm always shocked at just how they can't see that was done to hurt them. Those were things.
Well, it's because people don't think, man. I mean, in every one of these countries where they try to pass some sort of law to somehow ban Russian in one way or another, all their kids learn English in schools.
Yeah.
Mandatory.
Exactly.
That's one thing. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Kazakhstan, that was one of the first things I noticed. I was like, guys, we don't see that there's some sort of cognitive dissonance going on here. And you tell people there and they're like, you know what? You're right.
And it's their neighbor. It's their big neighbor that they should be friends with. And then they're learning a language from halfway around the world. It's bizarre.
Well, the justification is that's the global language of intercommunication and blah, blah, blah. And I ask, okay, why is it then the language of, global communication now? Because you guys lost the Cold War.
Right.
And then it's like, oh, you see what I mean? It's like, there's always these, and one thing I try to tell Russians, and one thing where I'll sort of, kill your hopes for the future of Russia, is this whole concept of having worked out apologetics seems to be completely lacking in Russia. You talk to people, no matter what their fancy suit or fancy army or fancy police or whatever uniform is, they don't get it. They're at that level, and that's about all there is. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of this stuff has worked, because Russians good at fighting, as we can see with the Ukrainian conflict, when we have the battle between PR and metal men and explosions. Russia does really well. When it comes to the whole PR thing, it's not so good.
Yeah, that's it. That is clear in Ukraine that the U.S., at least in the Western minds, is winning on PR, because it's a totally different story on the ground than people think. That, you know, Ukraine is absolutely getting slaughtered. And yeah, so I guess the Terra had a connection problem.
Yeah, I think I saw her freeze there. I was thinking, have I been so boring that she fell asleep? Because she sort of froze mid blink. So I was like, what's going on there? But that'll happen. But yeah, I can tell you that with this whole Ukrainian conflict, it really, really has been this battle of like the Ukrainian, or we could say Western side of things. They really were, I think still are, pretty sure that the real method of winning is this like PR and manipulative way of doing things. Because I guess it worked during the Cold War, but things are different now, and people don't really seem to understand that the Cold War is over. All right, connection probably better.
Welcome back.
Go. All right.
So maybe we could talk about what you think that having lived there as an American, what you think Americans should know about Russia, about social issues, and about just the propaganda. So what are the big like lies that you would like people to realize are totally not true?
Maybe on some sort of like basic level of sort of life in Russia level is recently I got encountered by a couple people asking these kind of questions which seem bizarre and laughable when you kind of live here, but they make sense if you were to read guidebooks and travel books about Russia. So, for example, I think everyone was very happy with like the travel information that was about Russia in the 1990s, and they've been copying and pasting that or going with that to this day. So the one example was someone asked, should I bring jeans and other items to Russia to use to barter with? And it's like, dude, this is... Yeah, it's like, dude, there's a barter. I said that, I mean, barter might technically exist because you can't really get rid of it. It's a phenomenon that's existed since like the beginning, since prehistory. But like, dude, you're not bartering for stuff. People have jobs and they have cards, and, you know, you buy something by tapping your card to this, the thing that takes your card, or sending people money and all this stuff. And yeah, it is not that kind of economy. There's not this weird thing of like trying to sell jeans on the street for money. That just doesn't exist anymore. However, in 1991, 92, 93, end of the Soviet Union, that there was some truth to that. There was some truth to that.
You could get a lot of money for the jeans that you brought. So there were travelers who could like pay their airfare with just packing a suitcase half full of jeans. So there was real truth in that, but like it shifted very quickly.
That reminded me of Netanyahu's comments a few years ago, where he said that people in Iran are not allowed to wear jeans. Like the government doesn't allow people in Iran to wear jeans.
Well, they should really just do a Google search of like Iranian people, and they'll see men wearing jeans. But anyways, that's one of the most frustrating things is we have so many tools available. Like even too, I would really recommend everyone who's watching this, do your Google Earth or whatever it's called, Google Map, and actually do the road view. Go around some capital cities in Africa. People there aren't that as poor as you think. And you can do kind of the same thing for Russia too, to be honest. So it's amazing how I'm curious. And Iran really has like the whole...
The map is available.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, Google Map,
Oh, okay.
You can just zoom in and see everything. I think it's only North Korea where you can't.
Nairobi, I think, is what you're saying, right? You're doing like Google Street
View. Well, yeah, I was thinking like, what's the capital of Rwanda? Kigali or whatever was one, because I met some people from Rwanda. I was like, I wonder what it's like. And it's like, yeah, they're not that poor. Maybe, out in the sticks people are, but I don't know. It's you can take kind of these little tours around the world and really see that like this, like whatever the world was like, and say right after World War II, where the United States was way up here, and the rest of the world kind of here. I think the West and the rest of the world, it's gotten a lot more sandwiched. I don't think that there's as big of a difference. I just did an interview with a Somalian general. Now, if you look at some pictures of Somalia is rough. You don't find too many nice pictures of Somalia. But like besides them and a few other really, let's call them troubled areas, more or less, I think the global average is kind of, the global sort of spread has become a lot thinner than it used to be in terms of I don't know what you'd want to call it. I hate the term quality of life, but I guess that's what would apply to what I'm talking about.
Look, it's stupid when you say average. The whole thing is stupid. That's the problem. People aren't looking at. They look at it's a political game to look at how the economies work. Because, like, just for example, I could live in a tent in Jeff Bezos's backyard, and I would be counted if they counted the people on that property as one and then average the salaries. I would still be like,
well, yeah.
People in the world, but I don't have any money and I live in a tent, and that's the problem. In the U.S., there are incredible poor. The poverty here is incredible. People just don't realize it. I mean, there are now YouTube channels that make their entire living just documenting poverty. I mean, they do these tours of like Philadelphia and these big cities showing these people just like dying on the street of overdoses and just living in tents. That's all it is. It's like hours and hours of this footage, and it's getting millions and millions of views around the world because people just can't believe it. And they're making tons of money because it's a lot of clicks. So if anyone out there wants to make money and you live near a poor area, I recommend getting a camera and making YouTube channels.
Listen, friends, Hollywood has done its job. Because even after all the stuff that America has done to the world, the various different wars, your Yugoslavia, your Vietnam, although I could say I could kind of justify Vietnam with is this battle of ideologies of the Cold War. So let's go after the Cold War. We got your Yugoslavia, we got your Syria, your Libya, Iraq twice, Afghanistan, putting a lot of pressure on you folks there in Iran. I haven't created an all-out invasion quite yet, but a lot of murder across the world. I bet that within 5 to 10 years, if America just kind of chilled out, really focused on Hollywood, it'd be forgotten. Completely.
That's probably true. I mean, because when we think about Africa as an entire world who isn't African, when you think about Africa, you always think about the poorest people in Africa. But when you think about America, you think about the richest people.
Yeah, exactly.
For a reason.
You don't think about me, the poorest person in America.
Exactly. Or in Russia, like it's like oligarchs and poverty. Like there's no like actual functioning economy or whatever. I mean, the propaganda narrative works so well. So I think you're totally right. Like Hollywood.
That's why people can't believe that there's almost like a 1950s middle class here. There's so many middle class people in Russia because, I mean, the Russian government is going to lie. And I actually usually don't advocate people believe statistics about Russia, but the Russian government, in their opinion, thinks that 14 to 20% of the population is poor or like not middle class. So let's just say hypothetically, they're not lying to themselves and lying to us. 80% of the population is middle class or better. I think that's within the realm of possibility, man. Like it really is that way. Maybe to be safe, let's say 70%, just to be super safety and tell the truth.
I think the disparity is what you need to look at. Like how much of the population is where's that gap? And the gap, like in some countries, like Northern Europe, the Scandinavian countries are really good at shrinking that gap. So you don't really have any poor, extremely poor. I mean, they think they're poor, but they're not poor. I mean, they could buy iPhones or whatever. So like, so they, that the actual physical despair of being poor can be really controlled if you have a economy that wants to do that and cares about it. And I think a lot of countries, socially organized countries like Iran or Russia, even more than the West for sure, is doing that. But like in terms of your idea of propaganda, you can see it in Ukraine because the Western propaganda is so good that it's convincing not only Ukrainians. Like I have a friend whose father just volunteered to fight, and he's like, "Why would you do that? I mean, you're just gonna. It's horrible."
Yeah, your chances aren't very good.
I don't know how to communicate anymore because it's just like, it's the brainwashing is so intense that it just you're gonna just go throw yourself on this war that's obviously being pushed for Western benefit and not for the Ukrainians. And then Americans hear this propaganda and they go when they know the front line. I mean, we know the frontline survival isn't measured in hours, and so you're throwing yourself. You might as well just shoot yourself in the head. Just save yourself the air flare and give it to your family. Like it
pretty much. No. Well, especially if you shoot yourself, then they will find the body. So
exactly.
Because you don't get Ukrainian benefits from the military if they don't find the body. Which is is a good policy for Zelensky there to keep a lot of funds for himself. It's unbelievable. So, but this is some very dark theater. Satan's sort of playset that the war in Ukraine has become. So,
how do you feel that's going to be resolved? Because of now this drone attack, they're saying that Russia's going to escalate. I don't know why they haven't escalated.
I don't think that has anything to do with it. You have to understand that the issue of this war in Ukraine, or I should say the war, let's just call it the Ukrainian crisis is a better term, a term I've used many times. I should have used it right now. The Ukrainian crisis has been the number one news issue in Russia since 2014. There's been no news issue that has superseded that in the news. So this is a decade of this issue being issue number one. And so we just had the 2nd of May, which is the anniversary of the massacre at that government building in Odessa, where they killed all the pro-Russian protesters and burnt them alive. It's also a little bit debated whether they were killed and then burnt or they were burnt alive. It doesn't matter. Still dead, still burnt. There's already justification. Like, there's no need for, like, some people in the West are like, yeah, it's got to be some kind of false flag. The necessity for that was already gone by like 2015. They were already Russia was already satiated with enough bloody imagery to accomplish that goal almost a decade ago. So no, I think that that's not going to have any particular effect. And as we've seen so far, Putin thankfully isn't a very sentimental person. And he's not really worried about, like, I've got to achieve this by this date because that's a holiday and it's going to prove something. Like I said, one thing about Russians being very terrible at PR is they don't even think about that kind of stuff. They are really not concerned with any of that, you know?
Yeah. Well, what do you think the chances are of China coming in there? And because I think that is a very fascinating possibility to have China actually like spearhead peace there, because they did it with Iran and Saudi Arabia in a way. I mean, it was a PR win, absolutely, for China throughout Africa. I mean, you can see all the African governments now are like falling and saying, we're not going with the U.S. anymore, we're going with Russia. And so what do you think?
There is a proposal already, right? Like Zelensky also talked to the Chinese president, and they were that they would like talk about what is the solution to come out of it. Is that right?
Well, the one thing is, after that phone call, or let's just say during that phone call, Zelensky still stated that essentially, okay, we'll allow the Chinese to be the negotiators, but Crimea belongs to us. All the territory that was gained has to be given back. Like, so the phone call, or at least from what I read, remember, maybe people are lying. Maybe, this phone call between them, because I'm always kind of very curious about, like, how these journalists always seem to have these great details about these phone calls. I think that's what because remember, maybe Zelensky's PR firm said that publicly, that's what was discussed in the phone call, but privately on the phone call, maybe they said something completely different. But at least the official record says Crimea has to go back. So essentially, it's a non-starter. It would just be the Chinese observing two sides that can't possibly reconcile based on that position. So, like the so-called reconciliation that we have between Turkey and Syria, but Turkey is saying that it's not going to withdraw its troops from the northern territories of Syria. Yeah, exactly. If Turkey doesn't give up the buffer zone, I believe is the term that they use, the 30-kilometer buffer zone. Well, it's sort of like, you can't. It's one way or the other, and I don't think that you're going to be able to compromise. I don't think the Syrians are going to be like, okay, we'll take 15 of the 30 kilometers of the buffer zone. No, they're not going to do that. So, and that's one of the reasons why it's very hard to make peace, because a lot of people think that conflicts between nations behave like conflicts between people, which are a lot easier to resolve. But they don't. They're very often stuck in their logic games. And furthermore, if Zelensky were to say publicly, you know what, all the territory the Russians gained, we're going to give up on it, he could be dead the next day.
Yeah. He's in a very strange position. Like, if I was him, I would just flee to China. Like, if I was Zelensky, I would just flee to China. Let China figure it out.
I don't know. Everyone always says the rumor mill is that after this, it's going to be cocaine in Miami, man. He's going to go down to Miami and just party.
You just posted, wasn't it? I think I saw it on your Telegram about what's his name, Guaido.
Yeah,
waiting for
Juan Guaido.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're going to be
walking casually at the airport.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, in all seriousness, some people again, these are these leaks that they were I think it was he has property in like Germany and Switzerland too now. So he may, although he seems more like the Miami style guy, so I think he's going to go to Miami. But he definitely has some sort of assets within the European Union where he can live very isolated from society and maybe survive till old age. Because the Russians, despite the fact what the media says, generally don't assassinate people. Besides Bandera,
your heart will let out with that coke habit. You're not going to live to
well,
old age.
Yeah. Well, that's the drug addiction is another issue, man. I don't know what to say, but I think he's going to party hard till the end of the road. So, to be honest, some people say that Zelensky's going to get his just desserts. Somehow the Russians will kill him or capture him. To be honest, if I were a betting man, I would say that I think he's actually going to survive this. He's been very well protected. And somehow he's actually knows how to survive this, because I think I hate to say this, but I think a lesser leader would already have been killed by someone from within or without or something.
Well, I think it's not only him that like his survival matters, because the U.S. is really trying to get stuff kicked off in Taiwan. And if things go disasters, especially for leadership in Ukraine, and they get slaughtered, the Taiwanese will have something to reflect on in terms of their loyalty. So I think like they're going to have to, for the next phase of this neocon insanity, they're going to have to at least show some kind of passing loyalty to the people who promoted their lies and whatnot. So I think he does have protection from America as long as America lasts. The problem is that the U.S. dollar is, I can't imagine this thing lasting much longer the way it's going, especially with Saudi Arabia. Do you have any thoughts on that, on the global reserve currency?
The one problem is I think a lot of people tend to be a little arrogant, and they think that just because they have some sort of podcast, they can talk about everything, including macroeconomics. So let's just take any information that comes from yours truly here, who I would consider myself more of an expert on the way that ideology works, is probably, I think, my strongest suit to talk about economics. So let's just say, I'm going to throw this out here. We're just a intellectual exercise. Don't take me too seriously here. I think that there comes a breaking point where the dollar is the reserve currency. Like, no one is going to one day get together and have some sort of big protest. Like, we have to eliminate the dollar as the world reserve currency. That's not the way human beings operate. It's just going to keep dwindling and dwindling. And at some point, there's going to be this sort of breaking point where the United States is going to be forced to have to play the rules like everyone else, like the Mexicans and their peso. Or I remember before Italy took on the euro, they had a lot of crises with their lira and some inflation there. I remember as a kid, like one lira, I think $1 was like 60,000 lira, which was crazy. And unfortunately, I think the United States is going to be forced into the world of the reality where people aren't buying their treasuries. The world reserve status is maybe officially exists, but de facto it doesn't. And they'll have to play by the normal rules. And the problem is they're going to have to play by the normal rules with $31 trillion of debt. I think that's right. 31 trillion, right? Something like that.
And at that point, it doesn't matter.
And that leads one, again, the United States is in some ways an exceptional nation. It has some advantages over a lot of other nations. So, would it go down the route of Zimbabwe? I don't know, but something's got to happen. And especially one thing I just want to add is that if we look over the last few months, every week a new bank is in danger of closing or closing. And these aren't these weird, one thing I guess that's an advantage of America is that America has some sort of like all kinds of like little weird banks. Like you go to somewhere and it'll be like the Alabama Valley School Bank, like some sort of weird, very specific bank that was set up in the 1800s. I'm not talking about those. We're talking about banks that spread across the entire country are closing down and being sold off, which essentially means who they're being sold off to. So we could be having a massive bank consolidation by a few of the bigger ones to buy out all the medium-sized ones and maybe some of the smaller ones as well. Or we could be looking at the beginning of a collapse of some sort. So I don't know. It's really hard to say. But if
your strong suit is in understanding social issues. That's all the dollar is. It since the 70s, it's no longer has any real value. It was detached from gold, and then it was sort of semi-attached to oil with the Bretton Woods agreement with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia just stepped away from and said, we're not going to trade in dollars anymore exclusively for oil, which is a major threat to the value because it's just a theoretical value. And economics, like macroeconomics, is not a science. It's
well, yeah. Well, the problem is Chris, if I had the chance to really go back in history, and again, because I'm not like an economic historian, I don't know of a particular instance in history when a country that was that big with a fiat currency that had that much debt, all of a sudden the status of their money kind of just changed and what they had to do to resolve that. Because like when the British after World War II faced crazy inflation and other problems, I think like their debt was something like 250% of their GDP or whatever. They were like way in over their heads, and that's part of what sort of broke up, at least officially. We could get into conspiracy theories. At least officially, the British Empire was that sort of economic collapse. But then again, their money was based on what? Real metals at the time. They only went away from real metals again in like the early 70s, I think. Maybe British people watching could correct me on that. But I think it's 1972, I want to say, but I could be wrong in mistaking Britain for America. But you see, so I don't know of a precedent. Like, I don't know what to compare this to.
Like you were saying, in a personal issue is sometimes different than a larger, like, country conflict. I think it's elucidative to look at the money issue. Like, let's say I give you like gold and we trade in gold, and then all of a sudden I want to switch over to representative of gold but not actual gold, and then I want that, and I want you to use it with you. I want to continue to have you give me stuff, and I can continue to give you fake gold. Like, you're not going to do it, but what I could do is I could be the only person with a gun pointed at you, and if I was the only person with a gun pointed at you in that room, you would continue to do that because you don't want to die. Well, and I think in the 70s, you see that. You see the ramping up of U.S. military bases around the world and the ramping up of the threat of U.S. military imperialism around the world pointed at countries to encourage to continue the reserve status of the dollar. And we're seeing that break down as well right now.
And it's also funny because the United States itself has been the one that caused the breakdown of this. Because trust me, man, Russians, and especially Russian businessmen, are lazy and not very loyal. They would have been happy to sit on the dollar for all eternity because it's comfortable, it's stable, it's predictable, and that's wonderful. But this has all been forced because of this Ukrainian nonsense and the necessity to destroy Russia and China. The United States created this problem that it was trying to solve, essentially. That's an important thing. But one thing we have to remember, let's talk something that might be hopeful for America's future and the dollar's future is, if the United States is, again, forced to play by other people's rules, remember, the United States, and about doing things at gunpoint, the U.S. dollar is still the currency of like 330 million people in a country that still has a lot of stuff in it. Maybe all the factories are gone, but there's still a lot of resources, a lot of humans. So I think that some of the value has to be retained or something. I'll put it this way. It's not, how should I put it? It's kind of like maybe an old car. Maybe at one time it was worth $50,000, but as long as it runs, and even if it doesn't run, it's still worth the scrap metal price.
Right.
And America definitely has that scrap metal price because it's still a big place.
I agree with that. I'm not sure that's optimistic, but the pessimistic side of that road is where you come to that point, and I fear this is happening very soon. You come to that point where America realizes, we're being checkmated around the world, and this is a decline that we are. And it's not like maybe conscious. It's just the way these big systems function. Is that we're going to come to a point we have to choose between bending down and following other people's rules, or either going off into some kind of like weird dementia, which might suit Biden, but some weird dementia where we function in a world that doesn't exist to the rest of the world and everyone kind of ignores us. Or more scary would be the use of massive force somewhere, or to create a massive war as a distraction, because like wars tend to reset things. And if the person who wins at the end of the war is the one who was, if America won a massive, or was the last man standing in a global war of attrition, they'd be able to set the rules again. So that's what happened after World War II, and they might want to do that. But the problem is now most of the world has become united against the West. Yep. So who knows? But definitely our friends there in certain parts of Washington, a lot of their solutions to this problem could be very scary. But we also have to remember that people alive today, maybe including us here, are not the same as they used to be.
And I think that a lot of the people who are sort of the globalists are actually not nearly as intelligent and capable as their forefathers, like the people who really rose out of the ashes of World War II to create the post-World War II reality that we've all lived in. Most people don't exist anymore. Okay, well, maybe Henry Kissinger's still technically breathing, but
he's writing books apparently.
Yeah, well, he's technically still alive, but so after he dies, and George Soros is probably like a Frankenstein monster, getting new organs sewn in there all the time to keep the engine running. But like besides those guys, who's going to replace them? All their kids are just a bunch of cokeheads and freaks.
Yeah.
They're you like the perfect example, because I believe Soros actually does have children, which is terrifying. But they're nobodies. Hunter Biden, that kind of person. That's really who their kids are. So. I think thankfully we have humanity can sort of rely on that.
But Hunter Biden 2028, I'm looking forward to that one.
Oh my gosh! Well, I can't even believe the original Biden was able to win or whatever. After all those, I really thought that some people, especially Trump, could really play up that child sniffing stuff, but that didn't have too much of an effect.
Well, it obviously did. I mean, it's all the media, man. It's all the media. It has to do with they played everyone on that one. I mean, they could have gotten whoever wanted elected because Biden had like a 4% approval rating, and the Democrat, like Sanders, was way more popular. It was all just a scam because Biden has more skeletons in his closet and he's easier to control, and that's all they wanted.
Well, if you think about it too, like just how much the Overton window has shifted, everyone knew that. Everyone. People around John F. Kennedy knew that the youngest president elected at the time, I think, and he's also the president of the United States. So guess what? He cheated on his wife a lot. He had a lot of opportunities, and he took a lot of them. And everyone could kind of feel that out. But if that would have been really exposed, like while he was still alive and president, that would have been such a huge scandal. Remember back to Clinton, who cheated on Hillary there. That was a huge scandal. And like with Biden, his kid is like on video with coke and prostitutes, like on video,
like naked.
Like they're not even rumors.
Like, it is unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, but you see what they did with JFK. Instead of exposing Marilyn Monroe coming over there late at night to the White House or whatever, instead of doing that, they just shot him in the head. And I think that made, from that point on, I think the coup was realized, and they were able to basically get away with whatever they want. The powers that be, whoever they are. I mean, there's a lot of debate, I would say. That's
amazing how there are so many of those issues in U.S. politics. I mean, coming from Iran, it's just unbelievable. Actually, I can't even think.
Tim would find that really interesting for you to describe what an Iranian politician is. Like, I think.
Let me know.
I mean,
the difference in like what we just described, and how would you describe like how they choose Iran? Well, how does Iranian politics choose their politicians? Like, what characteristics do they look for?
Like there is the slogan that has been the slogan of the revolution, and it's I mean, people use it as a slogan, and some of the like candidates might try to actually like implement that, but it's like serving the people and serving the ideals of the revolution. And the more humble you are, the more chances you have to win. Like they brag about, I mean, sometimes it could be fake, but they brag about how like their houses are very modest and they do not have anything luxurious, and like the issue of cheating on your, I mean, that's not even, I mean, if you knew that someone cheated on their wives, it's impossible for them not only to get into politics, but even in the society, it's considered like, really offensive, and nobody would accept that. Mm-hmm. Because it's, I mean, we come from a majority Muslim society, and the Islamic values are the ones that people are looking for in a candidate. And so like, for example, the first president that stopped living in the so-called palace, I mean, it's not a luxurious palace, but it was called like a presidential palace. And the first one who said, I'm not going to live in that palace, I'm just going to live in my humble house, like down in the like downtown, or like the place where it was actually in a neighborhood where it's known that people of the middle classes or lower classes, actually working classes, actually live there, was Ahmadinejad, and that's why he was very popular, because
Wow.
and then the next presidents would not dare go back to that palace because it was already there, and there was an example set. So yeah.
Oh wow. Well, yeah, that is definitely different. Unfortunately, with Russia, where Putin actually sleeps or actually is living is kind of actually is a mystery. People will tell you the Kremlin, but he's all over the place, and I think on purpose. So I was wondering that leaving the palace, that might be a bit of a security risk. I don't know.
But
Maybe
in
maybe the
Iran,
homes
it's
are well
not.
defended. What?
It's very safe. There's no animosity. This is the thing. As an American, also, I noticed.
Well, I meant from the CIA. I meant from our guys.
Yeah, it's true, because they have the MEK there. It is a bit of a problem, these CIA agents, but it is easier in a society where people actually do embrace their leaders and their politicians. Whereas in American, and even in Russia, we don't really get that. But like in Northern Europe, even, like, I met the Prime Minister of Norway, just there. I mean, just there was no security or anything, just walking around. So it's like, yeah, it's totally different. There's different cultures around the world how they view leadership, but here in America, especially, they're so corrupt and they're always doing so many horrible things against the people that it's just animosity that they would deal with. So they have to have security, and they actually are threatened with their lives. But if you're from a country where there's low disparity and people appreciate what you're doing, you can just expect goodwill from the public. So it's a very different phenomenon in different places.
I
know that's like when Putin does his yearly that 4-hour session where he takes like calls and stuff from the populace. Well, the one thing is if a lot of the Russian politicians were a little bit more accessible, the amount of begging and sort of like panhandling, as we call it, would be insane. Because essentially what that 4-hour thing boils down to is people with problems call to beg for solutions. And in fact, I'm a regular guest on something called the All Russian People's Front, which was sort of like a NGO kind of organization that's almost, I think they may have a cable TV channel. I don't know. Their studio is very impressive. But anyways, they do a live broadcast and, like a TV channel. And one of the programs they have is they just have people call in from across the country with complaints, and they sort of help them organize those complaints to send it sort of down the line. And I think that's kind of the problem with like Russia is Russians really do not have a can-do attitude. They have the opposite. They have that sort of like a feudal serf kind of, hey, boss, I need this. Give me it, boss. You're rich. That's kind of their way of looking at things.
That's American too. That's very American. Like it's work for it, but you are in that structure. You don't have individual like autonomy. So that's wow. It's well, I don't know how that would bode for the future of Russia internally, but I think at least the geopolitical realities of Russia right now are showing themselves to be far superior than that of the West.
Yeah. Well, especially if you live here, you can really see it. And I just want to mention one thing that also about politicians is that with Russia, and I think in connection with our Eastern Orthodox faith, Eastern Orthodoxy likes its glam. It likes its big churches, its gold, and all that stuff. But the contrast to that is that the station of the emperor is immaculate and is almost like a reflection of the heavenly kingdom of God on earth. But the emperor himself has very little. And people are very proud in Russia that, for example, Joseph Stalin had like 5 things in his will, and it was like boots, coat, and some other stuff. Yeah. So he essentially himself had nothing, but he was, this cult of personality. He was the state, and yet he personally had nothing. I think that that's sort of the ideal sort of Russian leader.
So. And that was before it became like kind of the Russian state became corrupted with the kind of like neoliberal capitalism that infests it now. And I think that's, it has been able to sort of blend that past social like putting society above yourself, which is what Satara just described in politicians in Iran. Like the idea is you you're supposed to be concerned about the welfare of the people before your own welfare, and we've lost track of that in the West. And it seems to be on a spiraling downhill, and the countries that have retained at least some of that spirit are the ones that are being more resilient these days. So, I guess Cetera, are there other questions you had? We've kind of dominated this. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I was actually like thinking about the comments that you made about I guess that's not only Russians, but also former like Soviet Union countries that are now like independent countries, that they're learning English at school, but there are not as many people who are learning, like, for example, other languages. And because that's kind of also what I see as a problem here in Iran, where, we have Arabic, but we start Arabic later than English, and we have more classes of English in our school than Arabic, which which is, that's like not understandable, because that's the language of our religious text and the daily prayers and everything. And the society in general is pretty much far more encouraged to learn English than to learn Arabic, like outside of schools and the classes. So I was thinking, like, what is your perception of the Russian public and like kind of this American dream and American ideal, and how much they buy the propaganda against Russia inside Russia?
Oh, well, maybe here's the little bit of a difference between maybe the way Americans sort of see their American dream and the way Russians sort of see the American dream. Like with Americans, if you watch our sort of political discourse, well, first off, the American dream used to be about sort of opportunity and being free from the binds of like a more traditional European society. Like, for example, the Protestants and the Catholics are killing each other in Europe in the 1600s. So you go to America and all of a sudden you're kind of free from that. You know what I mean? Or you're the loser on the Russian Revolution. You were on the white side. You can either stay in Russia and die, or you can go to America and be free from that. The sort of freedom from a lot of the problems of the old world, and the chance to sort of restart with a lot of space and opportunity. That was what the original American dream was, but no one thinks of that nowadays. Okay, that's the original concept. That concept has changed. The American dream now for people within America and without America is about big house, big car, money. It is all material, okay? So when Americans tend to talk about this, they sort of link their ideology to this. Like there's sort of this liberal thing of, it's like, well, if we make these nice social programs and everyone gets educated despite the quality of the education, then that's going to lead us to the sort of golden path. The Republicans are like, no, we've got to have low taxes. We have to have free market capitalism. With modern Russians, the Russians that are here today, they want the house, they want the car, and they don't care how. They don't care about libertarian, totalitarian, fascist, communist, don't care. Whoever gives me the house and the car, that's boss. And we all salute boss, and that's what we're going to do. And so in a lot of ways, Russia is very freeing ideologically, because all people want are the results. That's all they care about. But they're also it does kind of make them a little bit ignorant as to where the car and house came from and whether the person has a lot of debt or not. But c'est la vie.
Right.
Well, what are the perspectives of Iran in Russia? Like when you hear Iran talked about, is it the same kind of vitriol, neocon vitriol that you get in the Western media?
Oh, hell no. that I can tell you right now. No one has any, because remember, Iran is the enemy of Israel, which makes them the enemy of America and all this other stuff. No, the whole obsession with Israel thing doesn't exist here. Absolutely. It has never been a problem. Even when Russia was weaker, when I first came here, Iran has never been perceived as any kind of even mildly suspicious nation. One of the problems is we're sort of shifting to this multipolar world, and we're all excited about that. We don't get very much information about Iran. which would be nice. If we're going to live in the multipolar world, let's maybe get a little bit more info on the multipolar world. But essentially, Iran is a little bit of a mystery. But I would say if there's a stereotype of Iran, at least politically, it's that they're the reliable partner. You can always rely on the Iranians. They keep their word and they're willing to work with us. And isn't that great? You know, China's like our big partner here, but Iran always follows right after China because they're so, honest and forthright in their business dealings. Nice. So I would say that tends to be the Iran that people portray on the TV. It's like, I wouldn't even say it's like, I don't know, I guess just reliable partner Iran. That's it. But again, not a lot of information because really until like this war started about Iran, the only thing you'd really hear about is that you guys imported or exported here a lot of figs. And that's about
really?
It. Yeah.
Do you hear any of the like negative propaganda that America says about Iran, and do Russians like react to that as if it's a joke, or how do Russians react to the insanity?
Flat zero.
Wow,
that does not come up here ever.
I want to move there.
No one sees Iran as a threat because one of the things to remember is with Russia seeing itself more as a separate power. Has Iran ever threatened Russia? Never. So no one sees Iran as a threat. It's pretty simple on this end.
I visited Russia in 2012, and I remember I walked into a cafe with my friends in St. Petersburg, and there were two Russian guys came in, like they were really friendly and stuff, and we started a conversation, and they were asking us if we were from Israel. That was really interesting. Yeah, because I think because maybe I was wearing the headscarf, they were thinking of Palestine and Israel, and like the Muslims may come from there. I don't know where that came from, but that was a little bit weird. But in general, like how people interacted with us was very friendly, and I never felt like they had like at the hostel that I was staying and everything. I didn't feel like some weird reaction from people when I said I was from Iran. Yeah, maybe the only where I felt a little bit uncomfortable was at the subway in St. Petersburg. They asked me and my friends, because we were wearing hijab, to go through like the
metal detector,
an extra a metal detector, which they don't usually ask people. And I understand that because there have been bombings in the subways by some extremists, so they have this idea that
the Muslim Chechnya was used during the war on terror to get Russia on board with that. So there was a lot of questionable there that I
another big question was how many Chechens were actually fighting on the opposing side, So that was one of those interesting historical notes. Did they ask for your passport though?
No, I don't think so. I don't remember because that's more than 10 years ago, but I don't remember. Yeah.
It was
I don't think they asked for that.
Islamophobia probably, yeah.
Exactly.
Like that.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, I did because I asked people on the streets, for example, for addresses and other stuff, and even people didn't know English, and they struggled with talking in English, but they all wanted to help, and I was wearing the scarf at the same time, and I never felt there was any prejudice against me.
Yeah, and you probably won't really encounter that anywhere around here because that's kind of not the way things go, especially with women. Obviously, when guys are sort of in that age range of 20 to 25 and everyone's out late at night, sometimes there can be a little bit of interethnic conflict, but I think that's just kind of that time in most men's lives. So I don't know. If you wanted to also talk about the one thing about Israel, a lot of Russian Jews, even during the Soviet Union, went to Israel, and then especially after the Soviet Union and it became easy. So I've heard of something like about a fourth of people in Israel actually speak Russian. So there's a lot of ties with Israel, but at the same time, Russia sees itself now finally as being part of the global South. So the Palestinian narrative of their suffering, of their having their land slowly taken away, kind of reminds Russians of a certain country that they live in. You see what I mean? So in some ways about the whole Israeli situation, you see a little bit of a neutrality in Russia because like the Palestinian narrative is more familiar and kind of suits the logic of Russia, but there's a lot of connections with the Jewish side of Israel. So I think it kind of evens out in the end.
Ukraine is obviously there's a Zionist part of the Ukrainian conflict. So like they have this
you should watch.
I don't know if they recognize that in Russia or not, but
if you look back to my channel, Tim Kirby Hardcore, whether you find it on YouTube, whether the old channel that was stolen from me or the new channel, I don't remember which one it's on. Look for an interview with a guy called Afanasi, and we get into the whole sort of a big conspiracy theory that what's happening in Ukraine could be part of a greater Israel. There's a lot of people who believe that that's actually what's happening. There's that.
It's just a bunch of neocons in Washington who are like butthurt from the history.
Well, it's actually the local sort of Ashkenazi Slavic-ish Jews who might actually be kind of butthurt about the Khazar Empire being destroyed by the Proto-Russians, which is, it sounds insane, but remember the murders and madness that's happening in Israel are also based on things that happened 2000 plus years ago. So,
or even just recent. I mean, the Holocaust narrative is perpetuating that. So you have this even more recent phenomenon where you're able to perpetuate and you're able to victimize an entire group of people. The Palestinians had nothing to do with it, and they have to pay the suffering. And it seems logical to the people carrying it out that we should continue. We should hurt.
Well, yeah, I mean, I definitely have personally nothing against the Jews. I've actually had mostly Jewish people that I've ever spoken to be very respectful and kind towards me. But all I can say is if you look at the power structures in post-Maidan Ukraine, well, who's there?
It's interesting.
What can you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense either.
It doesn't have anything. And it doesn't have anything to do with Judaism. Like I always make this point that the city that I come from, which is the third largest city in Iran, has a Christian community and a Jewish community, and the Jews here have a synagogue and they have their shops, and I mean they're so actually like I mean. It's difficult to know if someone is a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim because like we just mix with each other, and it's not an issue. So
well, yeah, I mean, if you take a look at say the Hasidic Jews, they're very focused inwards on their own family, on their own community, on following the Old Testament to the letter and doing all their I want to call them rituals. I don't think ritual is the right way. Following the law to the letter of the law. That's what they're concerned with. And those are not the kind of people who are like the Kolomoisky billionaires who are financing neo-Nazi groups to murder Russians. Those are people who live a much more secular, blow, prostitute, drinking kind of lifestyle, who just happen to be I'll put it this way, they're very removed from that actual faithful core of people.
They're using the word Jewish. It's like it doesn't really tell you what you're talking about. You're not.
Yeah, it's kind of like how you essentially people like the whole thing. For some reason, the concept that we talk about Italian Americans a lot. Italian Americans have been in America for 5 generations. What Italian is left? Nothing.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of the same thing, because if you compare again these Ukrainian oligarchs to the Hasidic Jews or something, or these really other more hardcore groups. My terminology is losing. Sephardic Jews, for example, they're not even related, even loosely.
Yeah,
just nothing in common.
It is fascinating how that ethnicity is, it's misused by all sides. Like it's misused by people who want to like claim greater power dynamics, and it's misused by people who are anyway, it's generally
that's one of the reasons also where the Ukrainian works. So let's talk about the Ukrainian side of the Ukrainian conspiracy that's very Slavic in its nature, is that after the Russian Revolution, and especially after World War II, a lot of the people who were part of those Ukrainian forces that served Mr. Bandera and all that, they all went to the West. And the Ukrainian lobby, especially in Canada, where a lot of these people went to, has been very active. And they've had this dream for generations that they'll come back and punish the
Yeah.
Russians, even after they've been in, they don't even speak Ukrainian. There are, third generation, fourth generation Canadians already. So, we do get this thing where it's like these little check boxes in our head of, yeah, I'm an American, born in America, this, that, and the other, but I am Italian when I need to be. And we
Right.
can all
Well,
be manipulated by this.
we just brought
Like
up is
Iranians
fascinating
expect.
because when you say Nazis exist in Ukraine, in the West, obviously the propaganda has shifted. They used to say, of course, even the New York Times, Gray Zone reported like Israel funding Nazis in 2019 in Ukraine. So it's like we all knew this existed, but now you're not allowed to say it. But the fascinating thing is it's not illogical, because what you just described as like this dream to like go back and take revenge for your loss is exactly what we have here in the southern US with Confederates. Like the Confederacy is here and people fly Confederate flags. And if you don't really understand the long-term generational trauma that's been passed down since the Civil War, it seems like, oh, this guy just wanted to be a racist. But no, there's generational pain that's like being expressed when you fly the Confederate flag that says, we lost everything. This is like, we need some maybe for the right reasons. I'm not going to get into the morality.
Well,
of that
I mean,
war,
they could feel, the
like,
Southerners could feel that they're, in a lot of ways, that they're, we take slavery out of the equation, because then everything gets silly. If we take slavery out, we still see that they've probably felt that their ancestors died for nothing, and that they lost this peculiar culture, along with the peculiar institution that they felt was something special, and they had that taken away from them. So obviously they're salty. I would say it's kind of like, man, you want to talk about people who hate someone? The peoples of like the sort of Balkan areas, how much they hate the Turks, because the Turks really wanted to take their Christianity away from them, And so, boy, there people are salty about that stuff. Again, that ended in World War I. People are salty about that in Serbia, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece to this day.
But the U.S. fed that salty attitude in Ukraine since the end of World War II. They fed Nazism. They fed that extreme, like right wing, you would say, like Banderites. They fed that because they knew they could keep that in their back pocket, just like they do all around the world. They have like these little resistance groups, and so they actually nurtured that and kept this it's legitimate Nazism. It's not neo-Nazism. It's like it's a holdover from actual Nazis alive, and then they weaponized it, and you have the Azov Battalion and those who have like modified swastikas as their emblem, and everyone knows they're Nazis who are rational about it. They are only not Nazis when you're trying to convince Americans to fund them, and so it is fascinating how that trauma goes. It does. I mean, it creates these.
Oh yeah, that's part of the greater thing that I don't know. I swore I didn't make up this term, but I wish I did, called historical inertia. That a lot of the things that happen in the past, they have a certain amount of inertia, or they have to play out into the future. And I think that that's one of the things why, okay, we're still angry about slavery in America, especially black people, 140, 60 years ago. But are people mad about slavery in the Roman Empire? No. So like the Roman Empire's sort of tragedies and murders have sort of sputtered out. That inertia was lost. The train stopped. But with chattel slavery of the Deep South, that's still going, And of course, that historical inertia, like any moving object, can be sort of fed by different, forms of propaganda to keep that object moving, to keep that inertia going into the future. Because if the opposite were to have happened, if we would have had that Jim Crow period and everyone was just like, okay, Black America, I guess we're going to all just integrate now slowly over time, and we'll give you guys something to do while you all like learn to read and get used to the Anglo-Saxon way of life. A lot of the stuff would probably be fairly forgotten by now.
Yeah. Well, it all runs in different rates depending on who's benefiting from it and how capital can be accumulated. As I like to remind people, there is some logic to looking at Marx's theory, so what we're seeing now in Ukraine, I think, is just a perpetuation of this power shift,
Yeah.
this power dynamic, and it is nice to see Russia holding its own and not allowing the West to tell another big lie. But I really am, it's just a real tragedy for the Ukrainians because they're caught in the middle of this insanity, and they a lot of times don't know what the truth is, and they, emotionally it's very easy to have these narratives be exploited and throw yourself on the fire. And
less than half the population of Ukraine that was there during the Maidan Revolution, less than half of the population remains there, be they dead or if they fled. A lot more people have fled than have been killed, but you know what I mean? Like, that's insane about suffering. That's insane. That's, you take 10 people in any country and 6 of them are gone. Who knows where they are? 6 feet under or in Switzerland? You don't even know.
Yeah, and then who's going to come in and pick up the ashes?
Yeah, well, I guess my Russian tax rubles are. I don't know.
Yeah. Or BlackRock, if depending.
Well, that's the other side of the line. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. All right, man. Well, it's been fun talking. Do you have any other questions, Satara? Or
no, that's about it.
Well, hopefully we can have you back.
Interesting conversation.
Well, yeah, I'd be happy to come back, and I'd be happy to have both of you on my program, but gotta separate you. Got to separate you two, maybe separate interviews here. I'd love to have you on. You both have some intriguing stories to tell, and so we'll get to that soon.
All right, that'll be fun. Okay, well, you can wrap it up then, Satara.
No, it's your turn to wrap it up.
All right, I'll wrap it up.
The introduction.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Twice Told Tales podcast. Be sure to check out the links in the description for Tim's content, and we'll see you again soon.